All right, so in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the study guide for the Washington through Jefferson test and just kind of explain each little bullet point to kind of help you review and prepare for the test. So let's get started. So the first section that we're going to talk about is Washington's presidency. And kind of one of the main topics that we were studying in regards to Washington's presidency was the significance of his presidency. Okay. So right off the bat, why is Washington's presidency so significant? Well, mainly it is because as the first president, he set several important precedents. And remember, a precedent is an action or decision that others will follow. Okay, so remember, there's no guidebook. Washington didn't take the oath of office and open up the Constitution when he got home that night and start reading about what he's supposed to do on day one of his presidency. So there's no real guide on how to be president. So everything that Washington was doing was all being done for the very first time under the Constitution. And he knew that as the first president of the United States, he was going to have a really important job because all of the decisions and actions that he did as president would be things that other presidents in the future would eventually follow. Okay. Now, some of those examples include only serving for 2 terms. And remember, a term is 4 years. Okay. So 1 term is 4 years. 2 terms would be 8 years. So after he served 2 terms, he decided to step down and not run for a 3rd term. When he stepped down, he also gave a farewell address to the nation. Not every single president does a farewell address, but it was something that he felt was kind of important for him to do, especially because it was the first time that the country was going to see change in power. Another important precedent that he did was help Congress create executive departments. And then to kind of extend that, he placed people in charge of those executive departments. And that was his cabinet. Okay. And then another one that we talked about was establishing a foreign policy of remaining neutral. And there are other important precedents that he set, but those are kind of the main ones that we've been studying. Okay. So how did the government borrow money during the Revolution? Well, the main way that they borrowed money was through bonds. Okay. And remember, a bond is a certificate given by the government in exchange for money, and that money will be paid back on a certain date plus interest. Okay. So with the definition of the bond, I kind of explained how it works, but a better explanation would be Sally purchases a $100 bond. She holds on to that bond until it matures. So that would be the specific date. And then Sally can return her bond and receive her original $100 back plus interest. Okay, so that's how a bond works. Now, Hamilton's financial plan. What was his plan? Basically, this was the plan to get the nation out of debt after the Revolutionary War. Okay, and there are kind of three specific parts to his plan. So the first part is to deal with the debt. The second part is to gain revenue. And remember, revenue is just like a fancy word for gaining income. And then the last part is to stabilize the banking system. Okay, step 1, deal with the debt. Step 2, gain revenue. Step 3, stabilize the banking system. Okay, so how did he plan to implement this plan? Well, there were a couple of different things that he wanted to do. First, let me bold that. First, he wants to deal with the debt by assuming all the state debt and federal debt and pay off one bill. Then he plans to buy up all of the old bonds and issue new bonds. Second, he wants to gain revenue by implementing a tax on whiskey and a protective tariff. Oops. Lastly, he plans to stabilize the banking system by creating a national bank and a national mint. Remember, the mint is where money is actually like created. So the bills are printed, the coins are stamped out, whatever that process is. So his plan to deal with the individual state debts is simply to add the state debt to the federal debt and pay off one bill. Okay. In today's world, this is known as debt consolidation. Okay. Usually debts carry some sort of an interest rate, meaning the longer it takes you to pay off the debt, the more money that you actually end up paying. Okay. So if you consolidate your debt and you just pay off one bill, then you're only paying off one interest rate. Excuse me. The next thing that we want to focus on is, why did Hamilton think it was so important to pay off the nation's debt, regardless of who the debt was being paid to? His thinking here was that if the debts aren't paid, then we lose the respect of our investors or the people that we borrowed money from. And then we won't be allowed or able to borrow money in the future. Okay. So Hamilton again says, regardless of who the debt is owed to, it's very important that we pay that debt, because if we don't pay off that debt, then we will lose the respect of our investors and we won't be able to borrow money in the future when we need it. What are speculators and how do they make profit? Well, a speculator is a person who invests in a risky business venture in the hopes of making a profit. Okay. Now, speculators made a profit during this time because they were able to buy bonds from the original bondholders for less than what they were valued at. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my little example up here where I talk about Susie or Sally, wherever she's at. There we go, Sally. Okay, so Sally goes in and she purchases a $100 government bond. Okay, she wants to be a good patriot during the war, so she's going to purchase that bond and allow the government to borrow money from her so that she can, feel great about herself and hopefully help the country become an independent nation. And so Sally is going to hold on to that bond until the date of maturity. And it's at that date, which usually is several years later. Sometimes it could be months. It depends on what kind of bond you buy. But once that date has reached that date of maturity, then Sally can turn that bond back in. She can get her original $100 and then she's going to get a little bit more extra money. Okay. Now, these speculators, what they do is they come in and they see people like Sally, and they are going to try and purchase those bonds for less than what they're worth. Okay. Now, the example that I used in class was, I would pick a student, and that particular student is going to be Sally. Okay. She buys the bond, but all of a sudden she loses her job. Okay. And during the Revolution, there were a lot of American citizens at the time that came across hard financial times, and they needed money right away. Okay, so what ends up happening is these speculators come in and they are going to approach those original bondholders. So let's say Frank is our speculator. Okay, so Frank is going to approach Sally. He knows that Sally needs money right away. She lost her job. She's got 7 kids at home that she needs to feed. She's got to keep a roof over their head. So she needs money right away. She can't wait for that bond to reach maturity. So Frank tells Sally, hey, I will give you $80 right now, cash, for your $100 bond. Okay. Again, Sally can't wait for that date of maturity. So she can't wait for that bond to reach the maturity that it needs to so that she can turn it in and receive that $100. She needs money now. And the $80 now is going to do her better than the $100 plus interest later on down the road. So Sally sells Frank her $100 bond for $80. Now, the problem with that is that Sally now is out $20. She lost $20 on the deal. The bond was valued at 100. She sold it for 80, for less than what it was worth. Okay. So that's how your speculator Frank makes money. He only spent $80 for the $100 bond. And so Frank gets to hold on to that bond until that date of maturity comes. And then once that date comes, he can then go and turn that bond in. And then he's going to receive $100 plus interest. So right off the bat, when Frank purchases that bond from Sally, he's already made a $20 profit because he only spent $80 for something that actually costs $100. Okay, so that's how your speculators make a profit during this time period. The next question, how do protective tariffs encourage domestic manufacturing? Okay, we've talked about this several times now. Remember, a tariff is a tax on imported goods. So this is goods that are made outside of the country, not in the country. Okay. So protective tariffs encourage domestic manufacturing because if you make foreign goods more expensive, then people will naturally want to buy the cheaper domestic goods. Okay. Now, at this time, the foreign goods are cheaper because the countries that are making those goods, like England, have better manufacturing capabilities than the United States does. So they can produce goods faster, they can produce goods cheaper, and they can produce more goods. The United States doesn't have those manufacturing capabilities yet. Okay. So if we make those foreign goods more expensive, that automatically makes the domestic goods that the United States are making cheaper, and people naturally want to spend less money for the things that they're buying. So, who was against the creation of the national bank and what was their reasoning for being against the national bank? Remember, the national bank is going to be something that is part of Hamilton's financial plan. The political party that Hamilton belongs to is the Federalists. So, it would make sense that the Democratic Republicans specifically Thomas Jefferson are against the creation of the national bank. This is because he/they, meaning they, the political party, believe that it gives the government too much power. And remember, Democratic Republicans want more state power, less federal government power. Okay, so one of the main reasons why they're against the national bank is because they believe that it gives the government, the federal government, too much power. And Jefferson believes that Congress does not actually have the power to create a national bank. Okay, so Jefferson is a strict constructionist. So that means that he follows the Constitution exactly the way that it says. So when he goes into the Constitution and he looks in Article 1 in the section where the powers of Congress are being outlined, he doesn't see anywhere in there where it says that Congress has the power to create a national bank. Okay. So here, what was Washington's foreign policy based on? Hopefully we have a good grasp of that by now. His entire foreign policy was based on remaining neutral. And I keep spelling that word wrong. There we go. Remaining neutral. He doesn't want to get involved. Okay. Some of the specific examples of his foreign policy would include the Neutrality Proclamation. Okay. This was given to France and England, stating that the United States would not get involved in their war. Another one is Jay's Treaty. Okay. This was a treaty that was signed with England to get them to stop seizing American ships. And the last one is Pinckney's Treaty. And this was with Spain. Okay. To get them to reopen the port of New Orleans and establish a boundary for Spanish Florida and Georgia. So what is the Whiskey Rebellion? It is a rebellion of backcountry farmers against the whiskey tax. Okay, remember the tax on whiskey was put in place to kind of help gain revenue. That's part of Hamilton's financial plan. And there were a lot of backcountry farmers who didn't really produce enough whiskey to be able to afford the tax. And so a lot of them are going to be really upset. And this is almost kind of like another Shays Rebellion issue. So Washington's response, okay, is important to this. What he ends up doing is personally leading the army to stop the rebellion. And what this shows is the strength of the new federal government under the Constitution. Okay. Now, for this question, it says, what are the 4 things that Washington warned the nation about in his farewell address? There's actually a couple of things. It just kind of depends on how you talk about it. Okay. So one of the main things that he's going to warn the nation about are the formation of political parties. Okay. He sees political parties as being kind of a downfall of the United States. He also is going to warn about forming permanent alliances with foreign nations, because a permanent alliance with France means that now we're going to be drug into all of France's issues. He warns that the public needs to be educated. So in order for the nation to move forward and things to go well, people in the United States need to be educated on things. He's going to warn about political conflict within the nation. Okay, these are things like the Whiskey Rebellion. And then political conflict with foreign nations. Okay, so basically his desire to remain neutral. All right. So from here, your political parties, you need to know what the Federalist and Democratic viewpoints are. Okay. So we will start first with the Federalists. Okay. They want only the wealthy and educated to have political power and make political decisions. We are going to be pro-national bank, pro-tariff. Remember, those are 2 things that are part of the financial plan. I think it's important that we add up here that Alexander Hamilton is the leader. If you are a Federalist, then you have a loose interpretation of the Constitution. So you would be a loose constructionist. You favor close ties with England. You would want strong federal government. And you would want an economy that emphasizes business, trade, and manufacturing. Okay, so now remember, the opposite for the Democratic Republicans. Okay, so they are led by Thomas Jefferson. And they want the people, they want ordinary people to have political power and make political decisions. They would be against the national bank, against the tariff, and instead of having loose interpretation, they have strict interpretation of the Constitution. So remember, that means that they follow the Constitution exactly the way that it is said. So if it says that you can do it, then you can do it. If it doesn't say that you can do it, then you shouldn't be able to do it. Democratic Republicans favor close ties with France. They would want stronger state governments and less interference with the national government. And they would want an economy that emphasizes farming and agriculture. Okay. My suggestion for this section would literally be to memorize one of them. Okay. So pick whichever one you think is your favorite between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. Memorize one of them, and then you should know the other one's information. All right, so moving on to John Adams' presidency. Remember, the XYZ affair was basically an undeclared naval war between the U.S. and France. Okay. What happened and how did John Adams respond to that? Well, what happened was France started seizing American ships. So Adams sent diplomats to negotiate a treaty, basically following in the footsteps of George Washington by sending someone over there to negotiate some sort of a treaty so we can avoid conflict. And France responded by saying that we needed to pay them a bribe to leave our ships alone and give them a loan of money so they could fight their war against England. Adams said no to paying them money and no to going to war, and instead he chose to strengthen the Navy by having them build frigates, which are just fast-moving ships. Okay, his thinking here is going to war is not an option. It's not a very good idea. We're obviously not going to pay France any money, because if we do, what other nations are going to come asking for money? So instead, if we defend ourselves and strengthen our Navy, that could probably be the better part. Which political party was frustrated by Adams' response to the XYZ affair? That would be his own political party. Federalists. Okay. Remember, second kind of like bad part about James James. John Adams' presidency was not only the Alien and Sedition Act, but also, or not only the XYZ affair, but also the Alien and Sedition Act. So according to the Alien Act, there's two parts, all right? So part one, the president has the power to expel or get rid of any foreigner that he thinks is dangerous to the country. Okay. Part two is the waiting period to become a citizen has been extended from 5 years to 14 years. Okay, a couple of consequences to this, all right? When it comes to this Alien Act right here, it's going to prevent people from voting in elections. Okay. And which, again, doesn't really sound like that's that big of a deal. But the problem with that is that a lot of these new immigrants that are moving into the United States are actually siding with Democratic Republicans. And this law was created by Federalists. So there's kind of a contradiction there. Now, when it comes to the Sedition Act, remember the Sedition Act is a law that makes it illegal to speak out or write bad things about the government or its officials. Okay. Now, the constitutional amendment that it violates is your First Amendment, free speech, and free press. Okay. It doesn't say anything about religion, so it's not necessarily a religion issue, but definitely free speech and free press. And then you can also loop in petition and assembly to that. Okay, so what does nullification mean? Well, to nullify something means to cancel it. Okay, and which political figure was encouraging states to nullify federal laws? That would be Thomas Jefferson. Remember, he's a Democratic Republican. As a Democratic Republican, he wants stronger state government, so it would make sense that he would want to try and nullify federal laws. Okay, and there were two states that drafted resolutions against the Alien and Sedition Acts. Okay, those two states were Kentucky and Virginia. And basically, the resolutions stated that the states have the right to decide for themselves if laws are constitutional or not, which is not the case. Okay. The only group of people that has the ability to decide whether or not a law is unconstitutional is the Supreme Court. Okay. But this issue with the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions brought up the idea of states' rights and whether states actually have rights and what rights are those included. And that's something that we'll continue to look at in the future. All right, moving on to Thomas Jefferson's presidency. So why was the election of 1800 so significant? All right, for this one, okay, remember all of your Jefferson stuff was done with stations, okay? So hopefully you have already watched the station video because that should help you with some of these things if you struggled with any of these, okay? So the first reason why the election of 1800 was so significant is because it is the first time that power has changed hands from one political party to another in a peaceful way. Okay. The second reason why it is significant is because it was a tie, and the House of Representatives had to decide who would become president. And then the third reason is that the 12th Amendment was passed as a result of this election. Okay, so remember, prior to this, whoever came in first in the election becomes the president. Whoever comes in second ends up the vice president. So when you go to the previous election, 1796, remember that's what gave us a Federalist president in John Adams and a Democratic Republican president in Thomas Jefferson. That didn't really work out that well. And so now we also have a tie. And the 12th Amendment is going to basically create a separate ballot for the vice president. That's going to help eliminate a tie. And it's going to help with that little icky thing about having a president, one political party, and the vice president as another political party. The candidates for this particular election were, let me bold it, were Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr. And the winner of the election is Thomas Jefferson. So remember, Thomas Jefferson, again, is a Democratic Republican. Okay. So there are some things when he took office that he wanted to do to reduce the size and power of the central government. Okay. Some of those things include allowing the Alien and Sedition Acts to expire. Another would be cutting military spending, reducing the size of the Army and the Navy, and getting rid of domestic taxes like the whiskey tax. Okay. Now, why might Jefferson want to focus on reducing the size and power of the central government? That is because he is a Democratic Republican, and he wants the state governments to be stronger. Okay, so he doesn't want a lot of interference from the federal government. He doesn't want the federal government to be too strong. Okay. The next question: which major river in the United States was crucial to Western farmers who needed to ship goods because it was the direct route? That major river is the Mississippi River. Okay. The Mississippi River is going to be the most direct route for Western farmers to be able to ship their goods. Okay. Shipping these goods over land is not an option. It takes entirely way too long. It's very dangerous. There's a lot of obstacles in the way, like an entire mountain range. So using the river systems that connect to each other to ship goods is going to be the best option for those farmers. Okay. And remember, prior to Lewis and Clark having their expedition, prior to Thomas Jefferson purchasing the Louisiana Territory, okay, we had made a treaty with the country of Spain. Okay, Spain was shutting down the port of Mississippi in New Orleans. And so we make Pinckney's Treaty, and that reopens the port. And a couple of years later, Spain creates a secret deal with France, and they end up giving that Louisiana territory back to France. Okay. Um, so that's kind of a little bit of background and reminders about kind of that situation and why that Mississippi River is so important. The Louisiana Purchase is simply the purchase or buying of the Louisiana Territory from France. Okay. Um, Again, the purchase came from France. And this purchase is so significant to American history because it doubles the size of the United States. Okay. So when you look at the borders of the United States, prior to purchasing the Louisiana Territory, we'll just focus on the east to west borders. Your eastern border is the Atlantic Ocean, your western border is the Mississippi River. When you add the Louisiana Territory to that, the size of the actual geographic land pretty much doubles. We're going to extend that western border all the way out to the Rocky Mountains to include a whole other portion of the United States. And so it is going to be a really significant purchase in American history because it doubles the size of the United States and gives us a lot of really good fertile farmland. Now, how did he justify his actions in purchasing the territory? Basically, he stated that it was within his power as a president to purchase territory because it was part of his power to create treaties with foreign nations. Okay. So remember, Jefferson is a strict constructionist, which means he's going to follow the Constitution exactly the way that it is said. So when he opens the Constitution, he's going to see in there that nowhere in his presidential powers does he have the power to buy land from other countries. So he does have the power to create a treaty. So what he does is he sends James Madison to go purchase the treaty, or not purchase the treaty, but to go purchase the land through creating a treaty with France. So if we were to, look at that treaty, the treaty would say that the United States is going to give France X amount of dollars for the area of the Louisiana Territory, and in return, France is going to give the Louisiana Territory. That's the treaty that was created. Okay. Next question. Who helped Lewis and Clark explore the territory? Very, very famous Native American woman. Her name is Sacagawea. It is not Pocahontas. Again, do not pick that on the test. Not Pocahontas. She's already dead. It's Sacagawea. All right, now for our last question. Why was the Supreme Court case Marbury v. Madison so important? Okay, this particular court case is going to be important because it established the power of judicial review. Okay, and judicial review is the power of the Supreme Court to declare laws made by Congress unconstitutional. Okay, so that is it for the study guide. Hopefully you guys found that helpful. All of this information is going to be really, really good. It's all on the test. Study it. Do well on this test.